one thing in doing this just once every few months, as opposed to Lawrence and Jarrett, gives you quite a chance to kind of cogitate and ruminate on what you want to talk about. And several weeks ago, I watched something that got me thinking. It was, I was rewatching it. I've seen it several times. John Wayne directed the 1960 film The Alamo, and he starred in it too as Davy Crockett. And, the film sort of has its ups and downs. It's not a great film, but it does have a very compelling scene toward the end of it. These 180 or so kind of ragtag defenders of the Alamo, they've been there for nearly 2 weeks. This is February, March of 1836. And they've been defending this Spanish mission as Santa Anna's Mexican army has been building up its force to about 3,000 men and engaging in probing attacks. And the defenders of the Alamo have just learned that the reinforcements that they were counting on, they're not coming. And Santa Anna had already let them know that if they did not surrender at the outset, that they would all be utterly destroyed. No prisoners are going to be taken. But in spite of that, in spite of the lack of reinforcement, they decide they're going to stick it out. We're going to see this to the end. And the end now seems right in front of them. And in this scene, Davy Crockett is sitting around in the evening with his Tennessee Volunteers. And now, with their death not days away, but just maybe hours, they get very focused on life. And one of his men asked Davy Crockett, he said, "Well, what do you think of Davy?" And he says, "Not thinking, just remembering." And then one of his main lieutenants, an actor by the name of Chill Wills, some of you may recognize that name. He, if you're my age or older, he starred as the voice of Francis the Talking Mule in a series of 1950s films. But he started that role, and he's a pretty well-known actor partly because he had a very expressive voice. And in fact, this role, he was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor in the Academy Awards. And as they're sitting there, I wish I could really give you his voice intonations as he laments, "Well, I sure done a heap of things that I shouldn't have done. Seemed urgent at the moment. Got myself a heap of sins to answer for. Wish I hadn't did them. I reckon old St. Pete's gonna slam them pearly gates right smack dab in my face." And then the conversation continues about whether there is an afterlife or not. And while this Hollywood version of the actual events may not fit everything exactly, I think it does do a very good job of creating this sense of foreboding and ending and this laser focus that would have had to begin to overtake these defenders as they begin seeing their death approaching. Many people all of us in one sense know our death is coming, but it may seem years and decades down the road to us. And others with illnesses may think it's approaching much sooner, but very few people, especially in young or middle life, see their death as hours away, stare it right in the face. And it does create a focus and an attention, and blocking out many of the things that we think are so important become very unimportant. So I began to think about, who have I known that has been in this sort of situation? And I thought about a young man who started going to church with us when we were in high school. He was a couple of years older than me. And after he got out of high school, he became addicted to drugs, involved in sort of a love triangle and looking for money, ended up killing a man and being executed for killing that man. And while he was on death row, my dad was able to visit him a few times. And the man who sat with him the hours before he was to be executed said that this young man, he was full of faith and hope. He had refound his faith after he'd been in prison and gotten off drugs. But he was naturally hesitant about having to actually be injected with a drug that would kill him. And then I started thinking about, well, what about in the Bible? Who do we see like this in the Bible? And, immediately my mind went to Jesus himself. That in those last few hours, as he knows what's coming, John in his gospel in chapters 13 through 17 gives us a lot of insight into just how passionate and how focused Jesus was as he tried to give his 11 disciples, tried to give them reassurances and hope. He tried to encourage them for unity among themselves. And he prayed some of the most beautiful and passionate prayers for them and their unity and his glorification, and even for us. And then he went to the garden. And in the garden, this level of focus and passion went to a whole other level. And he prayed so earnestly that great drops of sweat pour off of his forehead as he says, Father, if there is another way that this can be, let this cup pass from me, but your will be done. And he went back and he tried to stir up the disciples. The song we sang here on Olive Brows refers to that. And then I began to wonder, is there anybody else? But Jesus wasn't alone that night probably in those thoughts. There are two other more obscure figures that almost certainly knew their fate too. We refer to them as the thieves or the criminals that were crucified with him. We don't see a lot of detail about them, but you can imagine people who have done what they've done and now know their deaths and their execution are hours away. It would be very difficult to sleep. You'd be thinking about, is there any way out of this? What's my situation? There becomes a focus in your attention. We don't see them alluded to until chapter 23 of Luke. And Luke says, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. Apparently, they were part of this procession where Jesus is carrying his cross from inside the walls to outside the walls. And as part of this procession, then they get out there and like Jesus, they're nailed to crosses, pulled up, and hung on these crosses next to Jesus. And one of these criminals in his pain and his despair looks at Jesus and says, so you're the Messiah. Well, why don't you fix this? And while you're at it, save us too. Why don't you save yourself? And while you're saving yourself, you can save us too. And the other criminal responds, we deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. Somehow this man offers maybe the most stunning statement of faith in all the Bible. Even as Jesus' best friends have given him hope and think, well, this is the end, somehow he's saying, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Not just, you don't deserve this. Not just, oh, you're a person who's innocent. I'm not. But somehow he still sees that Jesus is going to be a king of a kingdom. Even though he can't have any great idea of exactly how that's going to happen. We had just studied in Hebrews 11, where so many people, Abraham, Noah, Moses, and these others, they did things out of faith, even though they could not see and really could have very little idea how this is going to work out. Well, this man, this criminal beside Jesus, could easily fit into Hebrews 11. You know, this account of these two criminals, it's a moving and interesting account, even if we keep it focused just on them. Yet there's something bigger at work in this story. You know, is it really just coincidence that two criminals are crucified on either side of Jesus? You know, that hardly seems likely. In fact, in the famous Isaiah 53 passage, Isaiah says that the Messiah or this servant would go to his grave, which is a figurative way of saying going to his death, with criminals. And then later in the chapter says, and he will be counted among the transgressors or counted among the lawbreakers. You know, as we think about their stories more deeply, I think you can begin to see that their stories aren't just about them. They're much greater than themselves. Their stories are not just a side story of the message of the cross. Their stories are integrated with and integral to the message of the cross. Because as they speak, they aren't just speaking for themselves, they're speaking for us. You know, think about the first criminal. He says, isn't he saying, you know, if you are who you say you are, why aren't you fixing my life? And then the words of the other that I want to focus on, we deserve this. Isn't he saying that we all deserve what he's getting? This morning, what's our view of ourselves? You know, I think I'm pretty deserving of good things. And I'm often very disappointed when good things don't come. And I think many of us think, well, we're pretty good people and we're pretty deserving of good things. But this criminal lays it out as it really is. We aren't good people apart from Jesus. We don't deserve anything. What we deserve is to hang on a cross beside this criminal, beside Jesus. You know, we may think that this supper we have nothing to bring. But I think the criminal shows us that we do have something to bring. What are you bringing to this supper this morning? Jesus has bought his body, and we have it in the form of this bread and this juice. It may be difficult for us to be as focused as these two criminals. We don't view our deaths as minutes or hours away. But I would ask you to be introspective here. Are you sitting there? Some of us may be like that first criminal and sort of secretly antagonistic toward, or at least skeptical toward Jesus. Thinking thoughts maybe not that dissimilar from, Lord, why aren't you fixing the problems in my life? I've got serious issues. Why aren't you fixing them? Others of us here may be more generous. We may be thinking more along the lines of sort of, well, thank you, Jesus. The way we might say thank you to somebody opening the door to us as we walk in. Of, hey, we like you, Jesus, and we're appreciative. But, you know, I mean, we're pretty good people. Or we can take the attitude of this other criminal. And we can think that this supper, we deserve nothing. In fact, we can bring to it, we deserve less than nothing. We deserve to be hanging on either side of the body of Jesus. We've got nothing to offer him except what this criminal did. Naked and exposed and totally helpless, he gave everything he could. And that was his utter belief and trust and hope in Christ. I think the words and lyrics of this song speak to this very well. You stood before my failure and carried the cross for my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulders, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? What can I do but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand my soul to you surrendered. All I am is yours. So what can I say? What can I do but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? Is that what we're offering to God this morning? We'll ask the men now to come and serve the congregation.